recruiting. We're gonna try to hire another teaching professor, and kind of wondering what the appeal of coming here is. They're kind of asking us like, "Do you like living in Riverside?" It's like
I
recruiting.
mean,
Right now, I do. Yeah, definitely. So, it might get to 100 one of these days, but definitely not anytime soon. It is nice. So hopefully you guys are out and just enjoying the world, enjoying life. I know it can be tiring. This winter quarter can be a little tiring. So find the good out there. Find the things that keep you going. I don't know why football is called soccer here. So somebody will have to go that might somebody have to go look that up. What's my favorite sports team? It's hard because I grew up as a hockey player, and so I grew up in the Detroit area. So the Detroit Red Wings were I was a big Red Wings fan throughout the 90s and 2000s, and then they became kind of like a bandwagon team. And then I married Bree, and you know, she was at those Michael Jordan games. So she was in from Utah watching Michael Jordan beat the Jazz, and so I've married into some like serious Jazz fandom. But I like to think that I keep her balanced. She's appropriately critical. Last night was a good game, solid start to finish. But but right now, it's so yeah, we watch them a lot. We happen to watch Edmonton Oilers a lot for hockey. For football, it's hard because I have such a soft spot for the Cincinnati Bengals since our first job was in Cincinnati, and they've just been so bad for so long. And you're just like, maybe they'll be good one year, and like the city needs that, right? The city needs that. So, but I'll, anything that's entertaining teams, I like. How can you not? I mean, maybe you can not like Steph Curry, but I think Steph Curry is like super entertaining, except when he goes for like 5 for 25 in a night, and it's like, who is this guy? But he's an entertaining guy. So any sports team that entertains me, I'm on board with. So let's see what else. Anything else going on? Everybody seems to be doing okay. Let's see. If you're cold, where are you at? Where you at? My thing's saying 75 outside, so I'm feeling good. A little sunny, you can tell, right? I got like some weird sun to deal with, but the as the sun changes angle, it'll be better. Um, what's going on in this class, though? What are we doing here? So this class here, right? As you guys know, it's hopefully set up fairly straightforward, fairly simple for you in terms of the assessments. We've got problem set 1.1. There's going to be stuff will feel like a little bit of a review today, but what I want you to get out of the material that we're going to talk about early in this class is how can you take something as simple as supply and demand, apply it to a medical problem or a medical situation, and actually get some insight that you wouldn't have had without that economic backing and that economic foundation. So you'll look at problem set one, and there'll be some comfort there. I'll add problem set 1.2 to the setup to the module early next week, and then I'll release quiz one next Thursday. That'll be due the following Thursday, a week to do that. So that's what's on the horizon. I also want you guys thinking about term projects. I have a guide, like I said, available that looks at the Dartmouth Atlas. I think that's kind of an interesting thing to start with. But you may have just lots of things that you're interested in going into and digging into. And ultimately, I'm going to leave it up to you. I'm going to leave it pretty open. And so definitely, if you're starting to kind of go off into an area that you're not sure whether it's right or wrong, reach out to me earlier rather than later. And then somebody, I forget who it was, I should have looked it up, asked me about podcasts. It's something that I listened to. Fortunately, I started listening to podcasts. I was a little late to the game, but it was in December, late 2019. And the way that I run my online classes is highly influenced by that, actually, because it is about kind of trying to keep attention and things like that. So watch different YouTube channels and stuff like that to say like, look, if it's boring for me, right, that's not good. So I'm trying to make sure that you guys have some engagement as well, kind of thinking about it from your perspective. So the two podcasts that I listened to a few times that I think are worthwhile. And they're all ultimately very different, but there is an economic bend to both of them. One is called Data Book, shorter episodes, just about on kind of recent findings in the medical fields or medical industry. And then HC Biz, Healthcare Biz. These are longer episodes, but it's got more kind of like a techie feel to it. And ultimately, the whole industry is driven by economics. They're driven by incentives. So, that's more of like, spend. If you got a long drive ahead of you, that might be one to check out. Lots of different topics. Latest one is on machine learning in the healthcare industry. So, certainly, wide array of topics there. So. Okay, so that's kind of the housekeeping. But let's guys are good. Let's jump into the day. Last class, what did we do? We talked about healthcare expenditures, right? And we said we had this graph up here that talked about just the nominal healthcare expenditures. We had the Gapminder link. We had looked at healthcare spending as a percent of GDP, and really the last thing we looked at was this increasing cost of healthcare, of medical care. Lots of different ways to look at this, and we're gonna examine this throughout the day. Now, what I want to kind of return to real quickly is that when we talk about expenditures, we're really thinking about revenue, the amount of spending on these different goods and services in the healthcare industry, which is really, just keep it simple right now, it's just price times quantity. And so what we're going to do at the start, at least for the first half of class today, is talk about EpiPens and use that as the case study and really think about whether price or quantity is driving the increase. So here's kind of the kind of big picture view of this, is that if we look at EpiPens and there's, say, a limited number of EpiPens out there and there's this increase in demand for EpiPens, it's not really fair to judge a rising price as a problem, because look, we have a fixed amount of resources, a limited number of EpiPens, and there's a lot of people that need them to survive. It might not be good that the price is going up, and it might not be good that people are restricted, but if as many people are getting it as possible, and there's a price rise that comes with that, that's very different. It's not that I'm not saying it's good or bad in terms of, I'm not making that judgment. I'm essentially saying that's a very different scenario than simply just raising the price and just pricing people out of the market, but not necessarily providing any additional quantity, no additional demand driving this. So that's what we're going to look at today here at the start of class. Okay, and so here's kind of and I still just can't believe this graph here, right? This college cost versus medical care, right? Medical care looks bad enough here. You add college on top of it. Doing everything I can to keep the value high, but boy, prices, they're raising the tuition too quickly. It's too much. Okay, EpiPens though. So what is an EpiPen? Let's kind of start with that, right? So let's start with what is an EpiPen. And this is ultimately a shot of, I'm going to spell this wrong, adrenaline. I'm gonna look this up. No, I'm gonna look this up. I'm not gonna screw this up, right? Because this is a long word. Here we go. I was on the right track. Adrenaline. There we go. It's not that bad. So, all right. So it's a shot of adrenaline, right? And yeah. So Eugene, you got it. Yeah. So it's ultimately what it does is it essentially reverses an allergy attack, right? So it can essentially slow down an allergic reaction. And so what's interesting about a lot of allergic reactions that need EpiPens is that once you slow it down and are able to get treatment, right, there's actually this kind of, there's ultimately this usually positive outcome, a good outcome, a good ending to this, but you need to slow down that allergic reaction, right? That's kind of the first order event that needs to take place. So once we do that, then we can move on to the emergency room and take care of the situation, right? So an EpiPen is ultimately just the thing that delivers that adrenaline, right? That will slow down that allergic reaction. Okay. So, all right. So how much do EpiPens cost? All right. So if we look historically, and this is a little dated, but it's getting to the point, and we'll see it really come to fruition in just a second. All right, in 2007, Mylan, the company Mylan, bought the EpiPen, right? Bought the EpiPen. And again, this is just the device. It's the pen that's the device, right? And at the time, the price was equal to about $100, okay? And so you can see over time, right, that we've got the price at $100, $100. Around 2010, we get a little bit of an uptick. Again, that doesn't seem necessarily unreasonable, right, to have a little bit of an uptick to say $110 or $120. But then, right, we're going up every few months, right? We're going up, and we get these big jumps of like $50 to $100 per year, starting in 2014. We go 300 to 400 to 550 to almost all over $600, right? So by 2016, that price was equal to $600. So the question then is this increase in price efficient? And so what I mean by efficient is I mean there is no deadweight loss, right? So we see this big increase in price. It may be driven by this demand increase. If that's the case, then we're going to have this absence of deadweight loss, right? So really, that's what we're asking ourselves is there deadweight loss in this, right? If there isn't any deadweight loss, we're going to have one reaction. If there is, there's going to be probably another reaction, and it's all going to come down to the government. Should the government step in here and regulate the price of an EpiPen? Right? And so I'm going to go ahead and turn this into instructions. We had one result there. Don't let it alter or influence what you think, right? So should the government regulate the price of an EpiPen, right? And as you're thinking about this, we're going to go over this, right? We're going to talk about this, but I want you to kind of think, okay, so what would constitute a situation where the government should step in or not? Okay, so this I don't give you the neutral, right? And that's on purpose, right? I know if I would have put maybe, yes, I neither agree nor disagree, that's going to be the answer. That's going to be the modal answer all the time, right? But just kind of take a moment and just say to yourself, okay, well, if it's this type of market, then this type of market, this. Maybe you're influenced by the big price increase. Maybe you're thinking about just EpiPen demand in general, okay? And so as these answers are coming in, what we're going to do is we're first going to model, to answer this question and to kind of get at this, we're going to model the EpiPen market with supply and demand. With supply and demand. And so this is one of those things where, again, we're kind of revisiting our micro world, right? And this is even like Econ 3 world, right? Our intro to micro world. And we're thinking, okay, well, what kind of markets are appropriate for supply and demand? Well, if we're thinking about using supply and demand, we need to assume that the EpiPen market has a lot of characteristics, right? Lots of characteristics with regards to supply and demand, because it's saying, look, this EpiPen market is a competitive market. All right, so we need to assume it's a competitive market. So what does this ultimately mean? This means that the price that's being charged, the price that we saw on that previous page, is equal to the marginal cost of production, right? So remember that term price takers from either, this was probably more predominant in Econ 104A in that intermediate micro world, right? But so you could say, look, you got Mylan, the company producing EpiPen. They're just taking the price as given. They're just letting the market decide the price, and that just happens to be at the marginal cost. Okay. Then we also have, if it's a competitive market, easy entry and exit. Okay. So if you're saying to yourself, I don't think this is necessarily the case, you might be starting to think about the FDA, right? About the regulatory body that allows companies to produce goods and services in the healthcare industry, right? It takes, and COVID vaccine aside, it typically takes 10 or so years to have a product come from the genesis all the way to the market. So easy entry exit in this market feels a little bit of a stretch. Price takers, we don't really quite know with the information we have. The other thing is that in a competitive market, we have identical products. That's the assumption. So that's why you'll see me use something like gasoline. You'll see I think micro oranges can be used quite often, assuming that they're all from Riverside. Those are good oranges, but identical products like at a farmer's market. I think that's kind of a nice way to think of identical products, and that's going to be a competitive market. So kind of an issue is that in 2007, there was only one seller of the Epipen in 2007. So technically, it's an identical product, right? But there's only one, right? There's only one, right? And then the other thing that we would say, there's a couple other things that I think pertinent to our discussion is that there's lots of buyers, yes, and sellers, one seller. I don't know what anybody's definition of a lot is, but one is not a lot in this case, right? So, okay, but irrespective of that, that doesn't mean that the supply-demand model is irrelevant. You guys know, as you've went through the supply and demand discussions in competitive markets, very few markets are perfectly competitive. It doesn't mean that the supply-demand model is not useful. It can actually help us explain price movements quite accurately depending on the situation in the market. So if that's the case, right, we're going to have a downward sloping demand curve, right? We're going to have an upward sloping supply curve, right? So there's supply. And I'm going to go ahead and just say, okay, this is supply in 2007. This is demand in 2007. And right now, or well, say 2007, we've got a price of $100, right? And the quantity, not as relevant, but sure, there's the quantity. Okay, so there's our equilibrium in 07. Okay, so if we say, okay, well, we start at equilibrium 07, right? What could cause the price to rise? Okay, what could cause the price to rise? Well, one of the things that could cause the price to rise, right, and move up would be an increase in demand, right? Increase in demand. So what I want you guys to do is think critically and say, okay, well, if the demand for Epipen went up enough, it's not necessarily unreasonable to expect the price to go up as well, right? So kind of just jumping right into this, right? Should the government regulate the price of Epipen? So we've got a few people that are, and there's no right answer here, right? There's no right answer. So don't be influenced by your peers. Stand strong to your opinions. We got about 20% of folks saying, I don't think they should. We've got a large majority saying, yeah, it's something that they should probably do. And really that discussion hinges, right, somewhat, not entirely, but hinges somewhat on whether there was an increase in the demand or not. So we need to go get some information about whether demand went up over this 2007 to 2016 period. So here's some evidence, right? Here's some evidence. So between 2007 and 2016, right, there is a large increase, right? A large increase in food allergies, right? And this is not like a 2% or a 10% or a 20% increase. It's about a 400% increase in food allergies. So if that's the case, well, you're going to need to have an Epipen. That's going to increase the demand for Epipen. So let's just go ahead and do that very simply, right? This will shift our demand right, just like the good old days of Econ 2 and 3, right? Just going to shift this demand right and say, so now our demand for Epipens has went up from D07 to D16. So this will be, let's just call these food allergies, right? So we got food allergies increasing in demand. Let's go ahead and just assume that the cost of production, the production process isn't drastically different than what it was in 2007. Get over there. There we go. right? So now we've got E16, our equilibrium in 16 is we've got more people with EpiPens, right, that just happen to be paying a higher price per EpiPen. So price 16, right, is going to be $600, right? And as you guys know, it's like kind of not we don't really know a lot about we don't know the accuracy of these curves and the magnitude of these differences. All we know is that price went up, and if quantity goes up, we don't have a deadweight loss, right? So in this case, right, we've got a higher price, right, higher price and higher quantity, but importantly, there is no deadweight loss. So again, if this is the case, this is not necessarily saying we still should or shouldn't regulate the price. That's not what it's saying. But ultimately what it's saying in this case, if this is what's going on in the EpiPen market over a decade between 07 and 16, right? This is not evidence. We don't have any evidence of Mylan kind of taking advantage of any market power, right? And again, the government could step in and say maybe subsidize Mylan or subsidize individuals who need EpiPens, right? And we may say that that's a good use of funds. We can think of it as a better use of funds of lots of things with the government, right? But in this case, we have some evidence here, right, that it's at least not the company going after particular individuals and taking advantage of the situation. They're just essentially responding to the market, okay? However, right, let's kind of look at the other side of this, right? And I'm going to go to these thoughts from Congress here. This is I don't show tons of videos, but I think this is worth showing here. So, all right, so let's.
This hearing is critical because yet another drug company, Mylan, has jacked up the price of a life-saving product for no discernible reason.
I know there is considerable concern and skepticism about the pricing of EpiPens, and I think many people incorrectly assume that we make $600 off of each pen. It's simply not true. After subtracting EpiPen-related costs, our profit is $100 or approximately $50 per pen. I wish we had better anticipated the magnitude and acceleration of the rising financial issues for a growing minority of patients who may have ended up paying the full wholesale acquisition cost or more.
And if you listen to your testimony, you'd never know what the uproar is about. Do you understand the nature of the uproar?
I do, sir, and I truly believe the story got ahead of the facts.
Do you think you were charging too much at 600?
Sir, we believe it was a fair price, and we've just now lowered that price by half.
Why'd you lower it by half if you thought it was fair? If you thought it was fair, leave it where it's at. You're doing everyone a favor by charging 3 times what you acquired the drug for as a generic. You're trying to make us feel good about that. I just don't. I mean, I'm not buying your argument.
It was not your intention, but I think you might have helped Congress get around an issue by showing the blatant disregard you have and disrespect you have for people who desperately need this medication.
I mean, I feel like you're not giving me answers, ma'am. And I think it's in fairness to us, you knew what this hearing was about. You knew what our concerns were. And I'm asking you questions that you're the CEO.
Yes, sir.
And I would think you would know.
You have 94% of the market share.
Correct.
Yeah. I'd call that a stranglehold. I'd call that a lot of control. You don't want to call it control, don't. Because you have such a stranglehold on the market, you can do what you want in terms of pricing. And you have.
Sir, we have had many competitors in and out of this marketplace. In fact, that's just underscores the complexity.
Your competitors don't even equal 6% of the market, Ms. Bresch. I mean, that doesn't even pass the giggle test, what you're asserting. You virtually have a monopoly, and you've used it to your advantage, but unfortunately, it's at the expense of people who need it.
There we go. That is, you guys know that I'll take every opportunity I can to rail on politicians, but I thought they came out strong there. I like their arguments, right? It wasn't. There is some aggression there, but I think that last point, like people's lives are hanging in the balance here. over this, $600 to $100 difference. I like the reduction in price. We cut the price in half. We thought 600 was a fair price, so we cut it in half. It's like, that doesn't sound like a fair. It sounds like it was. I don't know what you're doing, right? It sounds like your definition of fair is a moving goalpost. So really here, what we can do, right, and where Congress is coming from, is they're saying, well, what if Mylan is acting or acts like a monopolist? All right. So if Mylan acts like a monopolist, can we show that maybe there's some inefficiencies in this market that need to be acted upon, or maybe we can rectify and improve just societal outcomes in general? And most importantly, and I can highlight this, I'm not going to highlight it in green because that won't make sense, no deadweight loss, right? That's what our target is. So let's see if we can kind of disentangle what could be going on here. All right, and so let's first, I think this is fair, at least it's a nice starting point. Let's assume that the marginal cost of producing an EpiPen is $100, okay? So we're producing a $100 product, so we can show that on a graph here by just saying, all right, well, here's a price, here's quantity in the market, right? And here's $100, and here's $100. So we've got this right here. Okay, so this right here is going to be our marginal cost curve. Okay, so this is kind of hopefully, jarring the memory bank a little bit. We're starting to think, okay, yeah, marginal cost here. We got price should equal marginal cost in a competitive market, right? Kind of going back to what we just talked about a second ago, right? If the market is perfectly competitive, right? Perfectly competitive, right? Then price is equal to marginal cost, which is equal to $100, okay? So the way that we would show that this is taking place in this particular market is we say, the demand for this product is a downward sloping curve, right? So we got demand right there. Right here is going to be our equilibrium in perfect competition. So we've got a high quantity, perfect competition right there, okay? So in this case, we have no deadweight loss, right? No DWL, deadweight loss. So let's have that up here, deadweight loss. Okay. So that's where we would be in a perfectly competitive market. Now, if this firm has monopoly power, right? Again, this is one of those situations where you actually are asking the firm, and I think if I was the CEO, rightly or wrongly, what they could have said is that I am just optimizing as a firm CEO, right? I am just trying to maximize profit. Maximizing profit, like we kind of discussed in last class, of a healthcare product has a different connotation than maximizing profit of cheeseburgers, right? They're very different goods because the cost to the individuals that are needing the product are very different, right? So we'd say if a firm is a monopolist or has monopoly power, all right, what happens is that they face a marginal revenue curve, assuming demand is linear and things like that. So this is kind of getting into a lot of things you went over in 104A when you talked about monopolies, but you face a marginal revenue curve that is twice as steep, right? Twice as steep as your demand curve. Okay. So the way that we would think about this is that you have and this is kind of an aside. If you're not digging this, that's okay, right? Your total revenue curve is going to be quantity times price, right? That's your total revenue curve, and then your marginal revenue is equal to the derivative of that with respect to price is what it is. So it's going to be the total revenue, or sorry, the quantity. Sorry, with respect to quantity. Right, and that's where that comes from. We don't need to. Oh, everybody. Oh, you can't see what you guys seeing it. Everybody. All right, are we on the C train? Okay, we're on the C train. Okay, the SEE train. Okay, so we can see it. All right. So again, this is just an aside. Don't get bogged down by it. But ultimately, what it means is that we have a marginal revenue curve that looks something like this right here. Okay, and I'm going to dash this up a little bit, and just say, okay, not that much. Right here, here, here. Okay, so this right here is our marginal revenue curve. And so there's lots, the thing that I really like about intermediate micro, and I never get to teach it, I just get to watch Bree teach it, is that you can really tell lots of great stories about what's going on in the graph and what's going on in the math. So here, right, that first unit that you produce, right, and sell, that comes at a really high marginal revenue. You get a lot of benefit from that. You're going to sell for a high price. You're not going to sell that many, but that marginal revenue that you get from that first unit is really high. If you want to sell more, you got to reduce the price, right? But here we still got a positive marginal revenue because it's essentially saying like, look, you have to reduce the price, but you sell more, so you're still making additional revenue, making additional revenue all the way down to here. Now, where do we optimize? Well, the profit maximizing level of Q, profit maximizing level of Q is always where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. And again, kind of take this opportunity. Yeah, you got it. Like take this opportunity to say, okay, so why is that the case? And this is actually like easier to me than just the general derivation or the first stories you hear about this, because you would say, and again, don't draw this. I'm going to draw this in red because it means that I'm going to erase it, I guess. All right, so this unit right here, if you produce this unit, this is the amount that you make. This is the cost of producing. So should you produce the next unit? Yeah, sure, produce the next unit because you're going to make profit on that unit that much. Where do you start making negative profit? After you cross this threshold right here where those two curves intersect. Over here, right, you get revenue of this much for producing that next unit, but it costs that much. That's negative profit, right? So it becomes really clear, right, when you attach some real definitions to these curves, this marginal revenue, marginal cost curve, that we're going to end up optimally producing right here at this point. So this right here is going to tell us that as a monopolist, we should produce this much. So we produce at Q monopoly. They produce at Q monopoly. So if we're producing at Q monopoly, how much do we charge? And this is, to me, this was always something that can trip folks up, and rightfully so, because you're saying like, oh, well, I mean, we just charge $100 and we're good to go. No, we've got to remember, right, that $100, right, is going to give us this much in terms of our quantity demand. We're going to have an excess demand if we only charge 100. If we want to make maximum profit, we've got to charge what that demand curve tells us to charge. So that's going to be up here. So in this case, let's go ahead and call it $600, and let's go ahead and call this equilibrium for that monopoly. Okay. So a couple big things come out of this, right? So we produce at QM, but we price according to our demand curve, right? So we price according to the demand curve, right? So in this case, I've just listed as $600 because that's what was being charged. Okay, and so then when we look at where is that loss to society, right? Who loses as a result of having this price be $600 and QM being our equilibrium quantity? Well, we could really just define it using this triangle right here, because this triangle, right, in short, is our deadweight loss triangle. Right, our deadweight loss triangle. But what does this really mean in this context? If you guys remember first learning about deadweight loss, you're like, it's the triangle. I found the triangle. And if the instructor pulls it off well, I'm like a 50% rate on doing this. That triangle has like the letters BAD on it, right? And you're like, it's the bad triangle. Like you can kind of nail it and you feel good about it. But it doesn't have like, it has some context, but like you're kind of just told like this is lost, you know, revenue, I guess, or lost surplus, consumer surplus, producer surplus. Like, what does that really mean? Here, this has a really interesting connotation, because what this is saying is that we have individuals, right? We have individuals here that are priced out of buying a life-saving device, right? These individuals cannot get a life-saving device, right? But they're actually willing to pay, right? They're willing to pay above the cost of production, right? They're willing to pay above the cost of production. So, right? So, but will pay over $100. So when we think about the term inefficiency, this should be screaming inefficiency, right? So we've got, and again, let's just put some numbers on here just so we can have some context. You guys don't need to write them down. Let's say that this is 100, and let's just say that this is 200, okay? So we've got 100 extra people out there that would be willing to pay Mylan cost of production. Say, please just give me this for cost of production. Then I'll be willing to pay more, right? Some people will be willing to pay 500, 400, 300, 200, but Mylan's just making 100, charging 600. There's your inefficiency right there. Has a different feeling than just saying, hey, deadweight loss is $75, right? And we can calculate, you can calculate the area of the triangle and get the deadweight loss, but this really speaks to what that means to have deadweight loss, okay? So a couple other things I want to show you guys just before. So I think it's cool. I think it's neat to see it in this context, but I want to show you guys a few more pieces of information before I ask you the question one more time. And this is not meant to influence you or anything like that. It's just meant to give you a context as to how to analyze this, right? But we've got QM that's much less than Q perfect competition, right? This is ultimately leading to poor health outcomes, right? And this is all potentially driven, right? Potentially driven by this monopolistic behavior. Okay, well, is there any comparable information that can help us understand this market a little bit better? Well, one thing is that the Epipen market in Europe has 8 producers. And the price, anybody want to take a wild guess at what the price of an Epipen in Europe is? $100. Right, actually $100. So yeah, right, it's no different, right? It's no different than what it was back in 2007, right? And then when we look at this recent FDA approval of a competitor of an Epipen in 2017-18, what we see is this massive drop in market share, right? And so for those of you who have taken something like managerial economics, I always want to teach something like personnel economics or just a markets class. This would really highlight that, right? You kind of get at this, and you went from a monopolistic market to a duopoly, and now you have a little bit of price competition, right? And if you have 8 producers, you're just going to have that much more price competition. So again, this is not meant to influence you. This is meant to just give you a way to approach these things. And so this is the same question I just asked. So I don't know if people change their mind or think about it differently. But ultimately, I think it's kind of neat to just see, all right, we can take all the stuff that we learned in these past classes that, again, I think some of the examples that you guys have seen have an incredible context. But here we see just a new context for this. So let's see what you guys come up with here, and just if there's any change in that. So once we get up to like 25, 30, I'll make these things a little bit more open here. Open this up. So, all right. So we have and again, stick hard. Stick hard to your beliefs. It's okay. Like, it's okay to disagree. It doesn't, or to disagree with the regulation and things like that. And so I think it's just about recognizing the cost, right? It's ultimately about recognizing the cost. So I'm making up numbers here. This makes it look like a really big cost, but maybe the cost isn't that big. And again, everybody's entitled to approach this however they feel comfortable with. So, oh my gosh. So Eugene kind of opened up. He maybe he looked at my notes. Yeah, this is good. So can we make it easier for those Epipen, we'll say, challengers, right? Generics to be more involved? Can we make it a little bit easier? I mean, this is just a delivery, right? Subsidizing the company to lower the production costs, just like let's at least get these folks, like let's get them the EpiPens because they're willing to pay, and then these folks we can decide, or at least talk. That's a different conversation, right? But should we at least give these folks the ability to pay what they're willing to pay, and then these folks down here who still have a demand for EpiPens, can we subsidize them, right? So Kyle, that's you're focusing rightly on this group, right? And then we can also focus on this group, right? But should we just make it easier for folks to come in and be a part of this, right? Let's see. Oh my gosh, did I lose that? I gotta bring these graphs up, guys. No. I want to bring it up in here. It's fine. Okay. So let's real quickly. We're not gonna model this out, but this is gonna kind of be a similar example. And this came up a couple of years ago. So I always show this EpiPen example because I think the numbers are straightforward. I think it's easy to kind of use our economic training to understand this better. Okay, but what about insulin prices? I don't know if you guys unless you have a need for insulin, you're not typically following what the price of insulin is. Okay, so let's take a look real quick at something that we've already seen, right? So this right here, and I'll back this up just a touch, right? This is looking at price changes over time between 2017. Things stand out, but we're not necessarily shocked by it like we may have been a couple of days ago. We see hospital services, which are different than medical care in general, right? That's going to be down here. Hospital services, college textbooks, look at the textbooks. They're like going to be so found out. They're getting found out every day. It's like, you know what hurts textbooks? Google hurts textbooks. The internet hurts textbooks. I'm surprised it's taken this long to flatten out. At any rate, so then you've got the usual suspects up here, right? Wages, a little bit above what the average is. That's on average, right? That's not all wages, right? There can be inequality issues with that. Housing, food and beverages. Take a look at things like new cars, furniture, clothing, cell phone service, software, toys, TVs, right? We all kind of always think about this, right? And in my world, right, this is like my prime time. This is when I was almost cool back in high school. We had like the big box TV, right? It was like 50 inches and it was, weighed like 7,000 pounds. And it was like the coolest thing in the world. And now like the idea of that just seems so onerous, just get a TV you can hang on the wall. That's not twice large, but larger, right? For a lot less money, right? A lot less money. So really kind of striking picture here, okay? So let's take a look at insulin, right? So insulin over that same time period, it's a little out of control. I would say that's a little bit high. So instead of hospital services, you have that going up, in this context, 225% or so. We've got 1,171% over a 10-year period. And it's like some of you guys out there are probably thinking like, how could I invest in that? That's like Bitcoin level returns right there. It's incredible, right? This is an incredible, essentially case study, right? And so the thing that I'm going to just, I'm not going to go over, in large detail, but this article right here kind of goes through this a little bit, right? So who's to blame about this? When you see something like this happening, what's going on? And this is a fascinating article. And again, I encourage everyone to read it. And again, I'm not forcing you guys to do it. It's not part of your requirement. But I think it's interesting to see the history of a product that's been around for literally 100 years, and it only has 3 developers, right? 3 companies are developing it. And essentially what's happened is that we got everybody as at fault, but there's no real competition in this. Part of the reason that there's no competition, and I want to highlight something down here a little bit. I'm not going to read through everything, but let's see. So down here, doctors are reluctant to prescribe other insulin products, the ones that are eligible for generic competition. That's despite the fact that research that many people will respond the same. And ultimately, it's like going against the tide. And so as we kind of go down through here a little bit, what happened back in kind of the early 2000s or late 2000s is that the price of the competition was really not that different. And so doctors were like, it's a little bit better product. Price isn't that different, no issue. And now they can't return, they can't go back to it. The FDA has made things even harder with COVID to get these generics to go through. So there's lots of actors here that are causing this huge spike. And for those of you who know about diabetes and know about insulin, that's like needing an EpiPen every day. Right? That's like the casual way of saying it. So having that type of graph, right? I mean, we can come up with striking graph after striking graph, but I think that one ultimately kind of takes the cake right there, right? There's just I don't know what else you're supposed to say other than there's something wrong with this market, and ultimately it comes down to competition, right? Creating generic competition is likely to bring the key to bringing costs down for the folks that rely on this. So something to look at. And I think there's no shortage of interesting things that are going on in the world, in the medical world, that can give you can use your economic knowledge to get at those questions. So we could have done the same thing with insulin as we did with the EpiPen, but I don't think I have like a big enough screen for that, right? Like I'd say this is 100 and this is like, I got to go up to like, $11,000 or something like that. So at any rate, it really kind of, again, just highlights how we can use what we know already to analyze this market. Okay. Now, one of the things, you guys are kind of bringing it up in your questions, it's somewhat related to these latest questions that came up on the chat, has to do with the sensitivity that folks have to prices, right? And you kind of saw that in those previous graphs, right? Like when you think about college, when you think about medical care, even childcare, right? We think about the sensitivity that people have to those prices. People are either they're very committed to a lot of products, right? And as a result, it would be really nice if, as economists, to kind of figure out about elasticity for goods and services, right? So the way I'm going to motivate this, and again, this is hopefully feeling like a little bit of a review, but also again extension with this particular topic. But an important question in healthcare has to do with how elastic is the demand for a product, right? A healthcare good or service. Okay. So let's think about how we measure elasticity in a market like this. Okay. So in a market like this, it's, where there's different goods that are out there. So you need like very inelastic, like what, and I think as someone again who has a family member going through cancer treatments and hearing about those bills, it's interesting because there's insurance behind it and whatnot, and thankfully that's the case. But I'm sitting there saying like I would pay for this if this is what it takes, right? And it's for that individual, right? So I think a lot of us have experienced those types of situations, and you have this very inelastic. I'm not going to respond even if the price goes even higher, right? But then you compare that to something like Band-Aids. I got that on there. Right? What is your sensitivity to Band-Aid? Price sensitivity to Band-Aids. It's like, let's imagine you just kind of get a small cut, right? You go to Walgreens and Band-Aids are something like $400. You're like, I will just use a cloth. I'm good. Like it's fine. But then that's different than something like stitches, right? Depending on the situation, right? So how do we get this, right? So how do we measure, right? Let's measure the elasticity of demand for healthcare. Okay. All right. So the complex way, right? The complex way of doing this, right? Let's think about actually getting this data, putting it into a textbook that makes sense so that, again, the example you have in a micro book is like oranges come out to $1 a pound. So how do we get the price of, say, a doctor's visit? Okay, so we can go ahead and ask the entire population, right? The entire population, how much they're willing to pay for a visit to the doctor. Right? Ask the entire population how much they are willing to pay for a visit to the doctor. Okay, so let's go out there, and if you're saying that sounds kind of like expensive, it does sound expensive. It sounds very expensive, right? But we want to get a demand curve, right? We want to get a demand curve for a general visit, right? That's what we're trying to do here. So if we do this, right? If we do this, right, we spend all this money just asking I'm asking Eugene, tell me if I'm saying this right, Kyle, right? Tell me if that's right or wrong. Andrew, right? We're saying, okay, how much you guys willing to pay for this this visit, right? And then we're just going to go ahead and map out a demand curve. Okay. So what we're going to get is we're going to get a quantity demanded versus price. Okay. So this is going to give us some general terminology in the health industry that's going to be useful for us as we move forward. Okay. So we'll have the frequency of visits versus our price paid per visit, which we'll call out-of-pocket cost, right? So you might have heard this term before, but we're going to be using this quite a bit, right? We're going to be using this kind of out-of-pocket cost terminology quite a bit. So what we're going to be able to construct is a straightforward demand curve, right, where we have the quantity, right, essentially the quantity of visits, right, versus the price paid. Okay, so so how often do you visit the doctor and how much do you pay? Okay, so my question for you is that if we go out there and do this, is this going to give us a true demand for a visit? Give us the population demand elasticity for visiting a doctor, right? Or is it going to be more elastic than that true demand? Or is it going to be more inelastic? Or are we kind of just like out in left field here, not knowing what's going on? Okay, so here's what we're going to do. I'm going to pick on two people, right? So I'm just going to the chat. So I'm picking on Eugene, and I'm saying, okay, Eugene doesn't pay a lot per visit, and he goes to the doctor every month. I feel like that's frequent. It feels frequent. I could have said like every week. That feels really frequent. Or you just kind of hang out at the doctor's office every day, right? But we're going to the doctor's office every month. Okay, so going to the doctor's office every month, right? So what we would say is that, okay, so Eugene's point, right, his point of quantity demanded price combination is going to be right here. So I'm just going to have a little e right there. Okay, so that's where Eugene is. Okay, Andrew, I ask him how much he pays, and Andrew pays a lot, right? Pays a lot per visit. And, he goes to the doctor once a year. Okay, once a year. Okay. So where are we going to place his particular combination, right? We're going to go to this high price and then this low quantity, right? There's nothing fancy, nothing crazy we're doing here, okay? So then when we look at these 2 points, we would just say, there's probably somebody, Kyle's in the middle there, Adrian's in there, right? And they've all got these different combinations, but it looks something like this right here, right? And so we have this demand curve, right? So we went out and we've literally gotten everybody's demand or quantity demanded and price combination. We plotted it and we run a regression, get a nice demand curve that kind of looks like this, okay? What's the problem with this? This is kind of a tricky question, right? This is kind of a tricky question. Why is this, what seems wrong about this? Something seems off about this. Something seems like something can't be right. So when we look at Eugene, right? Why is Eugene paying such a low price? Yeah, you're definitely an outlier, man. I made you an outlier. You're hanging out at the doctor's office. Why is it so cheap for Eugene to go to the doctor? What has he done? Right? I'm just asking him how much he's paying out of pocket. What allows him to pay out of pocket so little? Why is he only paying $5 to go to the doctor? So this came up in direct message. Al, yeah, you guys are starting. Yeah, so he's got good insurance, right? So I'm going to draw this in green here, right? He's got good insurance. Why did Eugene go and get good insurance? I know Eugene, so I can pick on him a little bit, right? Eugene's got good insurance, right? Because he's saying, look, I need to go to the doctor every month, right? Yeah, he can afford it. Oh, that's a baller answer. I think Selma's more on top of it there. Selma's saying, look, I'm gonna say what everybody's thinking. He's unhealthy, right? So if he's unhealthy, right? If Eugene's unhealthy, he's gonna go get good insurance. He's a rich guy, might be rich, right? But he's a bad eater, bad diet. I think we can say all those things, right? And Andrew's coming in saying that he's richer than me. No, we're gonna make this positive on Andrew. Andrew won out on this one, right? So Andrew is paying a lot, right? Like he's like, you can almost say that he's paying like full price for his doctor's visits. Why would Andrew have to pay full price? Well, he's not selecting, here we go, not selecting into, we'll say, good insurance. But Andrew's he's got money. He can do it, right? He can go ahead and he has the opportunity to buy into a good insurance plan, but he selects out of it. Why is that the case? Because he's going to be healthier, right? So now when we look at these two individuals and we say, what does their individual demand curve look like? This is very different, right? A very different question than saying, what's this market demand curve look like? So if we look at this individual demand curve, we would say, I bet you, I'm going to put in green here, that Eugene, he already said that he was unhealthy. He needed a good insurance plan. Even if that insurance plan wasn't good, he might go to the doctor, once every 6 weeks instead of once every month or once every other month, right? So his demand curve looks like this. This is the demand from Eugene right there, right? This steeper curve, right? That's going to be more inelastic, right? Andrew, on the other hand, right? He may have the exact same steepness, right? He may have the exact same elasticity, right? But he's just not going to go to the doctor that often, right? So if he said, oh, you're going to pay as much as Eugene to go to the doctor's office, he'd say, yeah, that's fine. I'm only going to go like maybe one other time this year, right? Gabrielle has a great question. Overall, though, wouldn't the price paid to the insurance count also, and then it would even out? So this is great. So this is what we have kind of and Selma, I think you're kind of on. Is that the primary reason for offering PPO and HMO plans? So you guys, so that's why I always have insurance as such a big component of this class, because we're starting to think, wait, so why are people selecting into these certain types of plans? So a PPO giving you more flexibility on your network, and HMO kind of being one big structure that says everything is done under this one roof. Both of them essentially speak to this idea that, yeah, Eugene's paying money, right? He's paying out a premium that's allowing his price to be lower. But even if that wasn't the case, right, he's paid into that plan because of his innate health status, right? Andrew's the exact opposite, right? But both of them may have the same elasticity. So really, when it comes to the elasticity of the entire market, you don't need it would be nice to just look at these two guys and say, all right, we can have this one demand curve, but really what we need is we need to change the price of Andrew, right? We need to say, okay, Andrew, what are you going to do at this low price versus high price? Eugene, same thing, and do that for everybody. And then at that point, you would imagine that we're going to have some sort of average. So I'm going to call this, I'm going to call it the mu right there, because that's average, right? So this average here, right, is going to be the demand for the average person. So we're going to take all the Eugenes, all the Andrews, give them multiple prices, and then see how often they're going to go to the doctor, right? And so what this really points to is that if we just measure demand and just take these snapshot, we're going to have a demand curve our measured demand is going to be a lot more elastic than the true demand. Okay, so we'll see if this actually had a correct answer. But you guys, yeah, we got a high fraction, get it, but no need to change it. No need to change it. Joaquin has a question about, does it only measure copay per visit? Yeah, so this, and this is such a fantastic question, because what I've done is I've totally simplified it, right? Because you're starting to think like, oh wait, should I consider the premium? What about the deductible? If you didn't meet the deductible, then you're going to pay 100% of the price until you reach a certain amount. Then you pay some amount of that. We're going to get into all that. So in this case, though, this is just kind of meant to think about it as an out-of-pocket price, out-of-pocket cost. Okay, so if we were to summarize this, right? So let's summarize this here. If we would say that the measured demand, right? If we just go around, and again, think about the price and the cost of having to do this for the entire country, right? But the measured demand would tell us that quantity responds a lot, right? Responds a lot to prices, right? This means that it's more elastic, and the kind of the shortcut way is that our demand curve looks more like an E, right? It's more horizontal, right? But then when we look at that true demand, right, versus that true demand, well, what we've got here, and this makes a lot more sense in the context of healthcare, right? That quantity is less responsive to prices, right? So in this case, it's going to be more inelastic, look more like an I, right? That's kind of the shortcut way to think about that, right? So that's I think that it's neat to take these, again, characteristics, these topics that we know and have studied in different classes, but then say, this actually, I can see why this is like useful in this particular situation. So we go out and get a bunch of data, find this, people respond a ton to prices in the healthcare industry. It's like, that can't be right. Yeah, no, it can't, I don't think it is. And in order to measure accurately, right, to measure the demand for healthcare, right, the demand for healthcare, what you ultimately need is a randomized experiment. This is a huge undertaking, right? This is a huge undertaking. And if, again, think about what we're doing here, and it's nice because, I like Andrew, I like Eugene a lot, but I can pick on him here, right? Because I can say, look, is it fair for me to say, hey, Eugene, I know you selected into this like really good plan, but I'm going to make you pay a lot. Like that seems like almost, it feels very unethical. I was like, Andrew, yeah, you won the lottery, man. We're going to have you're getting like free insurance, right? And he's like, I don't even need it, right? And so it feels like this is like not something, we can't do this every year, right? This is not like changing prices at a restaurant, right? So in this case though, right, if we want to have a randomized experiment, it's very costly. However, there have been some randomized experiments that we can go ahead and at least look at and see. There's some concerns with them, but at least they give us some insight on what that demand curve really looks like. So ideally, we'd assign patients into different plans, right? Different plans or prices for care, okay? And so what this does, and again, this is kind of going back to the ethical dilemma of this, is we would not allow sicker patients to select good plans, okay, to select good plans, okay? But it turns out that in the 1970s, Rand, the corporation Rand, they're actually run out of Los Angeles, they ran a health insurance experiment. And what they did is they went around, and I'll write all this out in a little bit more detail, right, is they went out and they essentially said, we're going to give you health insurance. You're going to be able to go to are managed care centers. So that's back to Salma's question, an HMO, right? So everything's going to be done under one roof. You're going to come here if you need, emergency services, or you're going to need some sort of outpatient care, just a preventative care, whatever it happens to be. Everything's done within house, all right? And what we're going to do is we're going to go to each person in the sample, each family, flip a coin, roll a die, whatever you want to say, and randomly assign you the fraction of healthcare costs that you're responsible for. And so the simple way of thinking about this setup and this outcome is we're just going to compare two groups, right? And just say group one faces higher prices, and then group two faces lower prices. We're going to have a little bit more of a spectrum, but we can kind of think of it that way, right? And say, all right, so we've got a large sample size, right? We're going to go out and get thousands of households, right? Get a large sample size. And this will allow us to assume that the average household in each group, right? The average household in each group has similar baseline health characteristics, right? Baseline health characteristics. So this is a mouthful. For those of you who have taken Econ 107 and 108, this is kind of saying, look, you can't just say, all right, let's compare Eugene and Andrew and just have those be our only two individuals, because there's a lot in that error term that could explain why they have different outcomes, right? But if we have enough people, if we have thousands of people in each group or thousands of households, right, and we're randomly assigning, right, we just got random people in each group, we're going to have a nice mix in terms of underlying health characteristics. No group will be more unhealthy than the other, right, when it comes to assigning how much they have to pay for their insurance or how much they have to pay for care. Okay, so more specifically, right, the RAND health insurance experiment, right, the RAND health insurance experiment, right, HIE, right, RAND health insurance experiment. What this did is we have 2,000 families across 6 large cities. So your usual suspects, right? Your Los Angeles, your Chicago, New York, Miami. So you've got a random set of families that are assigned, randomly assigned, what we call coinsurance rates to each individual family. Okay. So what is coinsurance? This is really important. We're going to hang on to this ultimately the entire term. Right? Our coinsurance rates are the fraction of total care, right? The fraction of total care paid by the family. Okay. The reason that this is a nice terminology, right? The reason I think this terminology works well is because if we think about a 0% coinsurance rate, what does this mean? This means that the out-of-pocket cost, right, the fraction of total care paid by the family is 0%, right? This is free out of pocket, right? Free out of pocket. So if you're part of this study, right, and they go to you and they say, okay, we're going to flip a coin, roll a die, whatever it is to get your coinsurance rate. Oh, it landed on 1 on the die roll. That gives you 0% coinsurance rate. What that means, you get free care, right? You're going to go to the doctor whenever you want, totally free care, okay? There was another set that got 25% coinsurance rate. And so what this means is that the price is rising, right, for the individual in that insurance plan, right? So they're going to pay 25% of the cost, right, we'll say cost of care, right? If we compare that to the 0% coinsurance rate, right, you get stitches. Stitches They cost like $7,000 a stitch or whatever, right? So you pay $10,000 for stitches. If you have the 0% coinsurance rate, you pay nothing. If you have 25% coinsurance, you pay $2,500. Okay, so that coinsurance rate rising is your out-of-pocket cost rising. So they also had 50% coinsurance rate. And again, a little redundant, but I think it's just helpful to get this context. Pay 50% of cost. And then they also had the real bad draw, right? 95% coinsurance rate. Pay 95% of cost. So you may be saying to yourself, like, okay, so if you like don't win the lottery here, right? What are you going to do, right? You get the 95% coinsurance rate. Oh, why did they randomize that and base it off income? So they didn't necessarily base it off income. That's a good question. So they randomized it though, because so here's the issue. The issue here, and I can highlight this and we can kind of go back to what we had before. I'll come back down very quickly. Remember that we said, take it easy there, right? Remember we said Andrew, he selected, it's coming back down, right? Oh, good, yeah, okay, why did they not base it off income? So here's the issue, right? So Andrew is healthier, right? Andrew is healthier, and so he's not going to select into the good insurance plan. So typically, we would imagine that Andrew is going to be in this group if we let him select, right? If we say, oh, we'll not base it out, base it off anything else other than random, right? Andrew's selecting into this group, right? Eugene, right? We already know that he was saying, hey, I want to go to the doctor often. He's going to select into this group, right? So if you don't randomize, right, and that's actually a really good point, without randomization, right, what you have is you have sicker or unhealthy patients selecting into, we'll say, lower co-insurance rate plans. Okay, that's what's happening. Yeah, that's what's happening, right? So, so we need that randomization, right? We need that randomization. But now you can start to say, okay, so I'm in this plan. We're all in this plan, right? And I say, okay, you get 0% coinsurance rate. What are you going to do? Well, what outcomes do we want to look at? Well, probably the first thing we want to look at is what happens to another terminology that we hear often in the medical industry, utilization. What happens to utilization when prices rise? Not a trick question, nothing out of the box, right? But we would say, well, let's look at the data here, right? They looked at outpatient, inpatient, emergency room care. So outpatient being not an overnight stay in a hospital, inpatient care, think of that as hospital care overnight, emergency room care, going to the emergency room. All right, so here's the outcome. Do people go to the hospital more often when they have free care? I mean, it's like drum roll time, right? Like, yes, they do, right? It's not surprising, right? But it's certainly interesting to be able to do this in this particular context, right? And to see this really fall out of the data. So we would say as prices fall, right, we've got more healthcare usage, right? And let's get into this a little bit, right? Let's just see this data because it's the last thing we're seeing for the week, right? But we look at this outpatient care. How do we actually read this table, right? So if you're on the free plan, how often do you go get outpatient care? Well, you go to the outpatient, get outpatient care 3 times a year. What about if it's 25%? Well, it's still potentially a necessity. So, but it does drop, right? It goes from 2.99 to 2.32 episodes by condition, right? So that's how often do you go for a bad back, right? What if you have to pay 50% of the cost? Now we're down, and again, think about the relative difference. We go from essentially 3 visits to 2 visits, right? When we go to this 50 and 95%. right? And that's gonna be essentially a 33% drop. Now, you may be saying to yourself, like, well, you're paying 95% of the cost, but you're still going to the hospital, or you're going and getting treated just 1/3 of the time less. This really speaks to the elasticity of medical care, right? So just because you're going from free to 95%, right, doesn't mean that you're just going to stop going to the hospital or stop going to get outpatient care. Notice how inpatient care, it's going to be a little bit more, I think, inelastic. Same thing with emergency. Look at emergency use, right? Like there's no real pattern. It's 22%, 19% back to 20%. That's ultimately because if you have an emergency, you're kind of going to the emergency room, right? You don't sit there and say, like, my arm's broken or something, I need some emergency treatment. What's my healthcare plan? So another couple things that I think are funny, and we'll get more into this as we next week. But I always like to look at the dental care utilization. It's like, I kind of feel like people are just like, I ain't going, I'm out. So, and some people are just always going, right? And so we see that when it's free, though, right, we see a lot more usage than when they have to pay 95%. Same thing with antibiotic use. Same thing with mental health care expenditures. I think that's really interesting. When it's free, you've got $42 on average per person that's essentially being paid. When it goes to 95%, that drops significantly, right? So that really highlights one of the concerns that there may be with these different healthcare plans. And then pediatric care is going to be a little bit more inelastic, and I think that makes, I think we can tell a story about that. So, all right, so we got utilization. We're going to talk about, and the last thing I'll write is just health outcomes and a question mark. Does this translate into better health? We're going to find out next week. You guys can read about it too, though. Read about it beforehand. Check out those problem sets. I thought this was a pretty fun day. It's, every day is going to have like a little bit of different flair to it, but again, hopefully you guys are learning something and seeing maybe those classes in the past are kind of making a little bit more sense. So at any rate, enjoy your weekend. Enjoy the weather. Stay safe. That virus is, it's rolling. It's rolling. We got record highs. So just take care of yourself. And we will see you guys all next Tuesday. Enjoy, guys. Have a good one. Have a great weekend. It's kind of nice not to teach an early morning class. I got to tell you that. It's so nice. I taught this class at 8 in the morning last year. Way too early. So, all right, guys, have a good one. We'll see you.
Professor, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So like pretty much like I'm just trying to like, I guess, kind of sum up what we learned today in class so that way I can kind of like be able to understand it and apply it.
Yeah.
So pretty much like we're just talking about like how like the coinsurance rates and stuff are affected, or how like the lower the insurance rate, like the more people use their insurance versus like the higher the less people use it. But how does that like apply to like a HMO or like a PPO or
yeah, that's a bigger question. And so what you'll see, and so I'm bringing this up right here. So this is just this is actually, for a lot of this is from the textbook. I'm going to have other questions that are going to develop a little bit more about this, but this is getting at like elasticity and RAND and stuff like this. This is stuff that is actually largely review, I think, for a lot of people. But what you're getting at, and rightfully so, is going to be stuff that really is what this class is going to turn into. And so I'm just going to yank out something real quick here. Just this is what's up ahead. You've got different insurance companies, and these insurance companies are offering a premium. Is that premium something that you would take on? And what's the consequence in terms of utility for that? And do the firms make profit? Are you better off? And so in terms of an HMO or PPO, we're gonna start by really